everyone, thanks for checking out this video, and welcome to all the new viewers. My name is Natalie. I'm a Canadian children's book illustrator based in Tokyo with best-selling children's books and products as of this moment available in over 28 major bookstores in Hong Kong, where I got my start. Today's video will be a bit of a different one and dive more into Q&A while I share some painting footage. I thought I would section off the topics into a few categories. You can jump to the various categories in the YouTube chapters. So to start, let's talk about some art tips. What are the most significant discoveries that led to the biggest improvement to your art? Giving variation to line weights drastically changed the overall feel of my pieces. Several years ago, I used to use a black ink multiliner that was 0.1 in size. This made all my line weights very uniform and a dark, saturated, solid black. My style is very distinctly detailed, and while impressive with a lot of lines and drawings, the ink pen portrayed every little detail with the same level of importance. This felt a bit flat and cluttered. The eye had too much detail to look at and was wandering around. Later, I switched to color pencil for outlining, as you can see in the drawing I'm doing right now. The natural variation in how sharp the lead was and adjusting the pressure of my hand brought in a light and livelier touch to the line work. Objects further away had a lighter, thinner line or even a colored line that blended more into the object itself. The speed of the line made a difference too, like when drawing hair you do a quicker swish, a sweeping motion. Such movements can be felt in the kind of line I'm making with a colored pencil. Another one would be understanding when to scale back on textures. In terms of traditional media, watercolors tend to have more granulating pigments, creating ink stain looking textures. When I want to portray something as more opaque, solid, and less distracting, such as walls, I paint them with gouache instead. For my human characters, I want to have a smoother skin texture, so I'll use Copic markers and then touch up digitally to further smoothen things out. The last discovery that I felt contributed to the greatest improvement in my art relates to perspectives. It's really helpful to look into art instruction books that teach us how to set up dynamic perspectives. I mentioned some book titles in a previous video, which you can click on the card to watch. In general, try to take a view that gives more dimension to the composition. For example, if you're drawing a store, you can try to depict it from the corner instead of standing straight on with a very flat sense of depth. And there's probably challenges with foreshortening as well. In the case of the drawing on screen right now, the shop in real life had stores on either side of it, so I couldn't depict it in a more corner perspective, but I still wanted to emphasize the indented space in front of the entrance, where all the picture frames are displayed. So shifting the view slightly to the right helped to introduce a sense of dimension and depth, and you can particularly see this on the right of the roof canopy. What are your top recommended art supplies? For traditional media that is water-based, like watercolors, gouache, acrylic gouache, and even Copic markers, I think investing in 100% cotton paper makes a huge difference in how the pigments react with the surface. With cheaper paper made from cellulose, the pigments tend to just sit on the surface, and sometimes undesirable puddling effects can happen. For this reason, I highly recommend Arches watercolor paper. It's expensive, but try to find the pad version instead of a block for a price cut. For digital media, I'm an iPad fan over digital drawing tablets. I find the Apple Pencil in Procreate much more intuitive and closer to a traditional media experience over using a Wacom in Photoshop. An ergonomic suggestion is to get the Sketchboard Pro and a grip for better posture and less joint pain. Before jumping to the next set of questions, I think I'll add some thoughts on the piece I'm painting. Earlier, I mentioned considering when to scale back on textures in a painting in order to achieve more visual hierarchies in a piece. I've painted this vibrant red canopy in gouache, which has a smoother saturated color to really give the piece a bold accent. The smoother textures also mimics the real-life material of a vinyl covering. The relative uniformity of the textures helps to read as a whole, whereas for the interior elements, I'm using watercolors with more granulating textures and color shifts to give visual distinction to many small parts. This probably falls in line with the less is more mentality. Traditional media is all about the joy of organic textures and reflecting tactile qualities of the process, but perhaps by intentionally selecting and composing different textures will better reveal each kind of media used. Okay, next section, career and development. How did you get started as an illustrator? I think this is the question a lot of people are curious about for working artists. I've answered it more in depth in a previous video, but to summarize, I actually studied architecture all the way up to my master's degree. I did well in school and did various architecture internships, but felt a strong mismatch with my own personal values and the hierarchical attitude towards others in an extremely demanding and harsh corporate culture. I think it's what a lot of millennials and Gen Zs are facing in today's work environment as well. But this is not necessarily from our generation being lazy or not able to handle the demands. To me, it feels more like I want to seek a lifestyle more full of understanding and positive impact. I think particularly as an INFJ personality, empathy and fair, respectful, accountable work ethic is pivotal to my personality. Anyways, I left my architecture job shortly after graduation and dove headfirst into freelance illustration. Art has always been a passion and source of comfort, so I had a body of work already that I did during my spare time at school. With the help of some network connections for the first few small jobs and some cold call searching on the internet, I found opportunities to showcase my art. I entered and won an entrepreneurial funding contest where I got my first start as well in publishing my own book. This was all abroad in Hong Kong, by the way, so you can imagine the challenges of doing all this away from home in Canada and conducting business in my second language. What challenges have you faced in your career? The nature of being freelance has so many amazing benefits, but of course the downside is there are uncertain times where income is not guaranteed. On the flip side, I think at my peak I was working with 6 clients all at once. There's a lot of discussion on freelance challenges out there, so instead I'll be more specific and recount some traumatic work experiences and what I learned. The biggest underlying message is to keep true to your self-worth, and it's so important to learn your rights as an illustrator. Okay, so story time. I think this happened in the first 6 months as a freelance illustrator, so still very new to everything. I got an offer to do some branding for a cafe. One of the key negotiation points in any job is outlining the license of use. I included this from the very first meeting and in the scope document, and everything was all set to go in the contract as well. I had even gotten to sketching the detailed draft when the client abruptly asked for full copyright of the characters. From a client standpoint, I can totally understand this, but in general, their needs are fully covered by stating in the license that they have exclusive usage rights for their specified needs. Transferring copyright could potentially mean that the client could alter the illustrations without permission or use them for other purposes such as merchandise or even resell it to someone else, all without compensating the artist. While this is possible, a full rights buyout would mean a much higher fee, and personally I felt uncomfortable with the risk of altered artwork under my name. This was my first time encountering such a request, and I tried my best to explain the situation with particular care to acknowledge the client's needs, but I was up against a very strong personality, which turned into a very abrupt confrontational phone call that felt unprofessional with name-calling. Again, the INFJ side of me kicked in, and despite how terrified and shaking I was, I remained professional, polite, and refused to sink to that level of disrespect. Well, of course I burst into tears after, though I think I'm like the fight them with kindness approach. Anyways, I much prefer to handle things in email where I can logically lay out the considerations, but that experience really pushed me to react quickly. Unpleasant, but I'm proud to have grown by that. As a preventative measure for something like that happening to you would be to fill yourself with knowledge what an illustration license entails. The Graphic Artists Guild of Ethical Pricing is a great resource, as well as the 3-Point Perspective podcast. One of the biggest help to my industry knowledge was joining the AOI, Association of Illustrators, who gives one-to-one email consultation on negotiating illustration contracts. There were a few more stressful incidents in the first few years, mostly due to an extremely low fee that was offered. The hourly wage for the work involved meant that it would be well less than minimum wage. Or another case was the client offered payment for concept work and signed the contract for it, but wanted to retract obligation to pay for the work done as they went with another artist. One time a client asked me to copy artwork they found online, and I had to emphasize my role as a hired illustrator is to innovate. While I can take reference with their examples, I had to stand firm that I would not copy others. In these situations, where the client is really not aware of industry standards and what a fair wage is, it can be really difficult to stand up for yourself, especially if the tone shifts to something more uncomfortable. Educating the client is important to uphold your role of the illustrator and as a representative of the industry, but I always try to consider the client's perspectives and needs as well. Through experiences, you learn how to adjust language and processes to fit the level of understanding each client has. This isn't just a protective strategy. I think an informed illustrator is able to offer more insights to the client and can spark new opportunities as well. Those points aside, from a more human interaction, there are clients who really express gratitude and admiration for the creativity you offer. And me personally, I may feel more inclined to put in extra effort for them. My happiest collaborations are the ones that don't feel as transactional. There's a spirit of creativity and affirming feedback and mutual appreciation. I think my personality is so hyper-conscientious, I can't envision myself approaching hiring an artist in the same manner as buying groceries or some more transactional type of commodity, if that makes sense. At the end of the day, business is a financial transaction, and regardless of the small gestures, I will still uphold my standards in the quality of work. I'm not trying to express this as a heroic thing, but I feel that empathy, conscientiousness, respect, and accountability goes a long way. This has taken maybe 6 years to go through many negotiations to build up my understanding. It's a natural progression, but when you're still really fresh to the industry, joining an association can really give yourself a bit of a buffer where you can reference industry standards. Have empathy because sometimes the decision was from upper management and not your direct contact. Be firm but respectful in your rights, especially if these terms were signed for in your contract. I know so well that in the beginning, when you're just starting out, every job opportunity is precious. It might be okay to be a bit more loose with your rights and pricing for initial experience and income to stay afloat, but I personally was more risk averse, or maybe the advocate and fairness side of my personality was too strong, so I couldn't continue with those scenarios. All those insights come with such challenging experiences, so hang in there. Illustration as a business. What are your key strategies for success? As a freelance illustrator, of course your art has to have consumer appeal and a level of proficiency, but what I noticed can help you stand out is the business mindset and the quality of all the other deliverables besides art. For example, when clients ask me for a quotation, I don't just toss out a number in a simple email reply. I would first ask more detailed questions to better understand the scope of their project, and perhaps ask for any visual references they have to get a sense of the level of complexity they're looking for. I preface my entire quotation with a breakdown of the scope with visual samples of past works and breakdown of numbers, sizes, level of complexity of each deliverable. I also include an overview of the working schedule and, of course, the standard terms and conditions with the all-important license. In a sense, you are explaining very concisely and visually what you can bring to the project, and this gives the client way more confidence in selecting you versus an artist that just replies with a number. Another key strategy is to hone in on your project management capabilities. After meetings, take an extra step to send a summary recap email outlining your next steps and the client's next steps to keep everything well documented and accountable. I'm not sure why, but I find this role is often up to me to keep the workflow organized. Put yourself in the shoes of your client and anticipate their needs, especially as a non-illustrator, how to set up situations like file management that are intuitive to understand. What is a technical insight you learned while working as an illustrator? The difference between RGB for web graphics and CMYK for print graphics. How to explain the differences of raster versus vector to clients. Educating the client that if I'm working traditionally, there isn't something drawn behind the character if they want to move it. Another one is to outline text in Illustrator so that the font remains consistent on all computers. Okay, let's jump back into this painting for just a little bit. Thanks for sticking around on such a chatty video. I hope I offered some thoughts for you. This is an old bookstore I came across in the Jimbocho district in Tokyo. This area is well known for its many used bookstores, especially in dealing with antique books. I've seen fine art wood block prints and boxes of wooden kokeshi dolls, so I really wanted to incorporate that aspect into this piece. For this scene, I wanted to put more intention into the characters. The nature of this kind of architectural painting tends to be very focused on the building details and the accuracy of rendering. I think sometimes I can get caught up in this and the characters ends up being more like an accessory to the scene, just plopped in to make it more cute. I've been trying to envision more of what the customers might be up to instead. I'm trying to give an element of storytelling in the small interactions they have with each other and the objects in the scene. One tip I've learned is that a character's eye line is a key visual cue of interaction with each other or something, so make sure you position the eyeball carefully. Extend an invisible line from the pupil and see where it's hitting. Last section, personal insights. What role does social media play in your practice? I've grown to accept that algorithms have changed over the years to be quite unfavorable to artists with a slower creation process. I used to draw daily doodles during my uni years as a way to distress, and I posted those online frequently. From then, I was able to gain more followers, but as I shifted to more finished pieces of art, such as intricate watercolor paintings that take a much longer time, I saw the algorithm change as well. It's really hard nowadays to grow on Instagram, particularly, but I've come to accept it, and hiding the like counts helps with mental health as well. Eventually, I prioritized making art for portfolio growth instead, and also I can't share client work online as well, so my updates became more sparse. However, how I've gotten work in the past was rarely due to my Instagram presence. It was actually through my website, and that's probably due to optimizing my SEO settings. I'm enjoying exploring YouTube further and can see more tangible growth here compared to Instagram. It also brings a new dimension to my works, and particularly the video introductions of my books and products has been pivotal in selling my creations to bookstores. One big consideration is whether you engage in social media like WhatsApp communication with your client. For me, this didn't work out so well, and I felt a real lack of work-life boundaries, especially with off-hour messages and expectations that I'm always available to immediate requests. I would stick to email as much as possible for a clear, trackable record of work progress or agreements, and I find email lends to more healthy, realistic communication patterns with clients. If you must defer to WhatsApp, I would suggest turning off the last seen function and silencing notifications during your off hours. Just because you work freelance doesn't mean you're always free. It's important for me to protect personal time that is needed to recharge to achieve the best effort during work. At the same time, I know everyone has different preferences and levels of work boundaries, so establish this from the start so that you can maintain the level you're comfortable with your client throughout the project. What do you do when you aren't illustrating? In whatever country I'm in, Canada, Hong Kong, Japan, the most refreshing thing for me is just to get out of the house. If I'm quite busy with client work, it can really feel like my whole week was just glued to my chair. I actually don't need so long outside though. I'm an introvert and can long for a quiet space quickly again. I'm not particularly a social activities seeker either, and prefer to just spend my off time with Dorkie exploring suburbs around Tokyo. The first few months of moving to Tokyo, we felt the freshness and lively energy of the city center like Shinjuku or Shibuya, but nowadays I rarely go there. For productive procrastination and relaxation, I like to clean around my apartment. My mind feels refreshed when my space is clean. Aside from that, I will indulge in my hobbies like collecting small toys and reading. I'm currently illustrating a set of comics for my next personal book project, Japan Lifelog, capturing stories that highlight the cultural and attitude differences between East and West found in the small daily encounters of everyday life. One of these stories is the observations I had at the supermarket. That aside, I would love the opportunity to illustrate with a more established publisher and more specifically working with an art director or agent. Similar to receiving mentorship, I think working under these experienced professionals can really help me to maximize my potentials and challenge the way I approach compositions, character designs, and visual storytelling. I work well under this kind of structured feedback loop as well. In terms of the kind of stories that I write myself, it's all very driven by personal experiences and either reads as a poetic reflection or a journal entry, so I do enjoy illustrating for other people's words as it can tap into a more imaginative voice that younger children can relate to. All the picture books I've worked on so far leans towards an initial interest in my architectural drawings and a heavier focus on Hong Kong themes. I would love to break free of that and do more animal stories or fantasy themes. I would be interested in a silly but insightful story like the works of Yoshitake Shinsuke. Hope you enjoyed this more chatty video. If you have any other questions like the ones we went over today, please let me know and I'll collect them for future discussions. Thanks for watching. Bye!